name's Danielle.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Haley.
Before we start, we wanted to do a land acknowledgement to show respect for the land that we learn on. Welcome to the Faculty of Social Work, University of Regina. The University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 lands with the presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland to the Métis Mischief Nation. Today, these lands continue to be the shared territory of many diverse peoples from near and far. The faculty works closely with our colleagues at the First Nations University of Canada and continues to reach learners and collaborate with partners who are located in communities situated in Treaty Territories 4, 6, 10, the traditional territories of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, Dene, Gwich'in, and Saulteaux nations, and the history homelands of the Métis people. We had the article Act Like My Friend, Mother's Recommendations to Improve Relationships with Their Canadian Child Welfare Workers by Judy Hughes, Shirley Chow, and Kathy Rock. Act Like My Friend is an article about mothers involved in the child welfare system giving their view within a qualitative study. The study asked interview questions to these mothers about what could be done to improve the relationship between social workers and themselves. Hence the title, The Majority of the Mothers Just Wanted Social Workers to Act Like a Friend Towards Them.
So for this Menti slide, this is where we'd have done the Mentimeter. Please just think about the following questions and how you would have answered them. What do you see as good characteristics within a friend? What do you see as good characteristics within a social worker? The purpose of this was to show that the characteristics within a friend and a social worker should be very similar.
So we would have asked the class to form groups of 3 to 5 and just discuss the following questions. The article talked about intimate partner violence, also known as IPV, as another major problem and dilemma that social workers and parents have to endure. The article indicates that many of the women felt that they had no support or help within leaving their partner, and the violence that was happening was never addressed. In understanding this, we would have asked the class, how do we as social workers help women who experience IPV rather than make them feel bad about it? We would have let the class discuss for about 5 minutes and then go around the room asking for the responses. And then our second question we would have asked is, not only have women with IPV experienced horrible services from social welfare workers, but women involved with drug and alcohol abuse and mental health issues have reported to experience a great deal of stigmatization and judgment from social workers, with the constant need to defend themselves and being labeled bad mothers. Why do you guys think stigmatization is such a hindrance to building positive relationships? We would have waited another 5 minutes and then went around the room to collect the answers as well. The article indicated that the relationship between social welfare worker and parents is essential, as it forms trust where no information is being withheld. In fact, it is so important that it shapes the view of the entire welfare system. We found that the title social worker can bring in negative perceptions, as history has shown the profession has not always helped individuals but have hindered them. For example, the role social workers play within the 60s scoop and the detrimental effects it still has to this day. Not only is there a negative history of the social work profession, but we all know that when a social worker walks in the door, it is because something bad has happened. We found that it is extremely important to understand how people may be perceiving us as social workers and to constantly keep in mind how our actions are making others feel. There can be a strain on the relationship between social worker and the parent, as inspecting the situation to make sure the child is not at risk can be invasive and insulting. Everybody wants to be seen as a good parent, but if there are improvements that need to be made within the parent-child relationship, it can be difficult to make these changes happen without offending or hurting someone. As discussed earlier, within our questions, we talked about intimate partner violence, also known as IPV. The article states that family situations involving IPV make intervention more complex, as workers must choose between either removing the child from non-offending mothers or leaving them in homes where they might witness or become involved in further violence. Within this study, it was said that many mothers had experienced negative encounters with social welfare workers, as the mothers were the focus of the problem, not their abusive partners. Many of the women felt they had no support or help within leaving their partner, and the violence that was happening was never addressed. In understanding this, the problem itself, the violence, was being ignored. This can be seen in many child welfare circumstances where the major issue in itself is being disregarded. Throughout many of our group discussions, we discussed if poverty is the issue, we should tackle the problem that is the problem and not label this as neglect. As asking the class on how do we as social workers help women who experience IPV rather than make them feel bad about it, I'm sure everyone would have come up with really great ideas to these questions. For me and my group, we came up with a few different answers as well. We would say get to the root of the problem, get help to those who need the help. If someone is being abusive, they need the services too. Counseling should be provided for the mothers or fathers who experience the abuse, but they should not be seen as the problem. As social workers, we should not put blame on anyone for the circumstances they are put in. It is difficult to read how the majority of the women who were dealing with IPV felt very unsupported and lost. We also then explain that not only have women with IPV experienced horrible services from social welfare workers, but women involved with drug and alcohol abuse and mental health issues have reported to experience a great deal of stigmatization and judgment from social workers with the constant need to defend themselves and being labeled bad mothers. And then we asked, why do you think stigmatization is such a hindrance to building positive relationships? We said that instead of getting the services needed to help fix the issues such as a drug addiction, often there is judgment from the social worker, and many individuals may feel that they are not being listened to or blamed for an illness that they have no control over.
So many of the women said that listening was a key quality for a friend to have as well as for a child welfare worker to have. So our next question would have been, why is being a good listener so important in the role of a social worker as well as in the role of a good friend? So in the class, what we would have done is have everyone write their answers on a piece of paper. Then we would have had you ball it up and throw it into the middle of the circle. Haley, Danielle, and I would have then picked a couple out of the middle and read them out loud. Since we're online, just think of the answers to yourself. The article was based on research done involving mothers who had previous involvement with the child welfare services, but who were not currently involved. These women were recruited from shelters, second stage housing services, and agencies that focused on child and family wellness. There were 64 women from British Columbia and Manitoba. The majority of the women either identified as white, Aboriginal, or Métis, and only 4 identified as black. The experience of being marginalized by their socioeconomic class and gender was common between the women, and in their interviews, they stated that they were initially investigated because of mental health concerns, substance misuse, or simply because they were young mothers. The interviews with the women started with one question: describe their experiences with child welfare workers and the system as a whole. This was asked to get a better understanding of child welfare workers' practices from the perspective of the mothers. The final question that was asked each woman to provide recommendations to improve the system for other women. And so the remainder of this article focused on the responses to those 2 questions.
So, not surprisingly, the women stated that they wanted their welfare workers to be authentic and genuine in their interactions, and some of the women stated that they wanted their workers to be more like a friend. This concept would counter the negative ideas of child welfare workers being punitive, scary, and authoritarian. One woman said that instead of telling them, well, if you don't do this, we're going to do this, don't come across as authoritarian, come across like their friend, like a human. Another said, let them know that you're here to help. You can phone us and ask us for help. We're not here to come and destroy your lives. Another recommendation was to have the qualities of a good friend, such as listening, being supportive and encouraging, offering hope, and expressing empathy. So all of the answers that you guys put for the last question were more than likely absolutely right. And according to the article, the women stated that workers needed to listen to the mothers before making judgments based on information that was received in the referrals. So 3 women in particular stated, give people chances to say what they say and don't just go by the complainant's story. People should be given a chance to express who they are without being judged. Who are you to come into my home and understand my life story? You don't go into someone's home and know their history. The parents should be given the chance to express their needs. And one woman said, I used to fight with some of my workers a lot because they wouldn't listen to me. I just wanted them to hear me out and about why I didn't want to be where I was and where I was living and a couple of other things. They need to try and talk to people more instead of just assuming stuff. A quote from one of the mothers that stood out to us as a group was woman number 19 from Manitoba. She stated, when you're looking at this woman, think my mother, my sister, my aunt. Don't think of this as just somebody else that's coming in and has another problem. Try to put it into your own heart. Compassion. So listening and empathy gives workers the opportunity to find the root of the problems. It's a means to understanding why there are behaviors that place themselves and their children at risk are happening. Throughout the responses, the women said they just wanted their workers to be caring and show concern about them as women, rather than focusing on why they have failed their children and failed as mothers. Child welfare workers should use active listening by recognizing the importance of the mothering role and identity by acknowledging and validating the strategies that the mother has used to protect their children. Another way to demonstrate active listening is to acknowledge that they have heard and understand the difficult circumstances that the women are in, which has led to the referral to child welfare in the first place. So research has also proven that mothers will hide difficulties that they are experiencing out of fear that their children will be removed from their custody.
So here I would have asked the question to the class and asked the class to raise their hand to answer. How do Eurocentric ideals and personal values affect the relationship between the social worker and the client? So the answer to this was in the textbook or in the article. It can create greater gaps between workers and parents. These tools reproduce the race, class, and gender bias that parents experience outside of the child welfare system. European middle-class ideals are not necessarily the realities of their clients' lives. As social workers, we need to be self-aware of any white Eurocentric ideals and any anger or frustration we may have to mothers that seem to lack motivation due to mental health and addictions. As social workers, we also need to have empathy to social and economic conditions and disparities that often lead to the need for involvement with child welfare systems, like poverty, racism, and gender inequality. We also need to make sure that we are open and honest about the power we have as social workers. It is important that even though mothers want us to act like a friend, that they should know that we do have the power to apprehend their children if necessary. There are many recommendations for mothers who want social workers to act like a friend. One of these is in regard to intimate partner violence situations, and it is to intervene directly with the abusers. Many of the mothers found that social workers tend to focus on the mother and how good the mother is at mothering, rather than the actual situation the mothers are in. Social workers should provide the mothers with direct and concrete support. This can include obtaining protection order and affordable housing for when a mother needs to leave their partner due to intimate partner violence. It is important for social workers to advocate for children to stay at their homes or at least stay connected with their biological parents once placed in a foster home. If these are not options, then at least provide the biological parents with photos of their child growing up. Connections of the parents and child seem to be the most important and emphasize recommendation from these mothers.
So, where we struggled a little bit in the article was where some of the mothers stated that mothers should not be separated from their children and suggested connections between mothers and children continue through a close relationship with foster families. Another woman stated that child welfare workers should help maintain connections between parents and their children. At a minimum, some of the mothers stated they wanted their workers to provide them with information about the foster family with which their children were placed and ongoing information about their children's well-being and care. So we had just watched the trials of Gabriel Fernandez on Netflix very closely to when we read this article. And I'm sure some of you in the class have also watched this documentary. We were mortified when it came to the conclusion. So 4 of the social workers involved in this case were charged criminally for not doing their job and protecting Gabriel by removing him from the home. These workers were facing up to 10 years in prison. The documentary mentioned that the workers would go into the home and take everything that the mother was saying in regards to how he got his injuries, like he got into a fight with the neighborhood kids or he fell off his dirt bike, and then the social worker would leave without actually talking or seeing Gabriel. My worry about Act Like My Friend is, when does the relationship with the mother become more important than the relationship with the child? So where does this line get blurred?
The article states numerous times the importance of building a relationship role between mothers and social workers. However, it is also important for social workers to be open and honest about the power of their role in investigating risks to children. Having professional boundaries and making sure that lines don't get blurred is also of high importance. So here's where we would have welcomed any questions from the class. Thanks for watching.
That's our presentation.
Thanks.